Ooh, it's time for another review with Sir Captain Mustard on this little Rover 416 SLI. Now, if you know me, you'll know that I really like Rovers. I think they're very, very underrated and they're quite rare. So when you see a car like this coming up with the opportunity to have a review, I couldn't say no. Rover R8 classic wedge-shaped saloon, one of my favourite types of cars ever, for many good reasons. Just the overall style basically is very well balanced. It doesn't look as old as it actually is. Maybe that's a bit subjective, but this car came out in 1989. Actually it didn't. The hatchback version came out in 1989. The saloon came a couple of years later, and personally I think the booted version looks even better than the hatch. That doesn't really happen too often on a car that's based on a hatchback. Look at the Astra Belmont or the Vauxhall Nova with a boot. Ooh. I'd drive one if you got one going, but I don't think they look very nice at all. I'm not usually a fan of wheel trims, but these original trims look very nice and very suited to the car. There's nothing show-offy about this car at all. It's just a nice saloon car that happens to be nicer than you would expect it to be. This particular car is having a few restoration jobs. The window regulator, for example, has decided not to work on this side. The previous owner appears to have misjudged someone else's car for what they presumably thought was an empty space, but you know, it's a 1994 car. So it is 27 years old at some point this year, which means we can forgive it for a couple of things, surely. It's not like it's had a restoration, but my friend who owns this car, the reason I do know him is because he's buying parts. Well, he's bought parts before, and he brings me beer. Those minor jobs done on this car and a good buffing up of the paint, and I think this will look rather fantastic actually. Now the young lady that's brought this car around for me to review has told me it does have one Nigel feature, and I think I've spotted it. I think it's that looks like a slightly different colour. Difficult to tell in this bright light though. Back in 1997, when I first owned a Rover R8, it was the first car ever to feature something like this. Pull the boot release and the boot pops up. I still really like that. I think that's a nice feature. Now we have the interior. The interior of the R8 is just so well thought out. It's kind of very simple in design, but it's got so many nice little touches everywhere. Normally there's a little red ring that illuminates that. Now maybe this particular model just didn't have it for some reason. Nice chunky steering wheel. The features I particularly like are these lovely wood cappings, and again, just like the 800, they are actually wood. They're a wood veneer, but they're still wood and not plastic with a wood print on them. So the doors, I think they look kind of classic, but they also look quite modern and functional. Although I've never been overly mad on the electric window switch on the passenger side. Driver side's really good though. And the door pull has a lovely weighted feel to it. There's a nice tray on the dashboard where you can keep your cup of coffee. And I used to do that. So I used to go to work in the morning and buy a cup of coffee and put it on the dashboard. And just once or twice it did come off while I was driving along and ended up with a lap full of hot coffee. The controls are exactly the same ones as you have in the Rover 25. And they feel quite nice. They don't feel overly expensive, but just functional. And that one's got, no. Maybe my friend doesn't know about that, but it's got an odd button on that one. These here, nice, and cold air in your face, and a stereo, not original, an automatic gearbox. Then we have a little bit of storage, but not too much. I mean, this car was from the day where people just didn't have to ferry absolutely everything they own around with them in order to go to work. So there is a glove box, there is a centre armrest that has £2.50 in, and you know, door pockets. They're not bins, they're basically there for maps. From a time where your travelling salesman would have to look at a map and read a map to find out where he was going to. Yeah, I miss those days. Rear leg room then. Right, now the leg room in the back isn't particularly good, if I'm absolutely honest. If we can see this, my knees are actually pushed up against the seat, and it's okay top here, you know, because the roof's quite square. So on the coupe version, of course, a proper sized adult doesn't really have much of a chance, but I'm fine in here. Nice clunky door. Hope it's not got a child lock on now. Good, it hasn't. But from the back we can see the rest of the cabin nicely. It's such a lovely bright place to be. Some cars manage to be really dull inside, but this one, you know, they're not. There's lots and lots of big glass everywhere, so the visibility is actually very good as well. Now we know it's a 1.6 from the badge on the back, and we know it's an automatic, but is it a Honda or is it K-Series? Yep, it's a Honda. Single cam, I think 109 brake horsepower, programmed fuel injection, nice and clean under the bonnet actually. Looks like it's had a bit of a clean up. Coolant is the correct colour. It's got power steering, probably some screen wash, and hopefully some oil. Anyway, enough of this now. I think it's probably time I took this little old motor out for a drive. Ah, yeah, immobiliser. Press the immobilise button. And it starts on the button, as they say, and sounds very smooth indeed. Yes. Right, so here we are, peering over the steering wheel because I don't have a holder for my device. First impressions. First impressions are very nice. Very smooth drive. Very non-clunky kind of drive that you want from either an old car or a new one. And the gearbox so far is changing from one gear to another in a rather lovely and acceptable fashion. At the moment I just wish I could open the window actually, because it is a very hot day. I believe a window regulator is on order, so that will be dealt with. I did have a window regulator for this, but my friend Turb went and took it off of me. What seems to be missing actually so far is the R8 smell, which is like a kind of it smells a bit like crayons. Something in the carpet that gives this unusual, very distinctive smell. But you know, with the windows a bit open and there's an air freshener there as well, maybe it's just been a bit too disguised. Maybe my friend doesn't like that particular smell. It's very quiet and refined actually. I mean, it's very typically the influence of Honda in this car. Oh gosh, lots of bags of cement. Now it's time for a little bit more speed as we get, oh, and there we go, 40 miles per hour. Very, very smoothly and effortlessly. In fact, my friend said to me that she thinks the automatic gearbox is probably the best one of these. And, you know, maybe that's right. There's nothing breakneck about the way it goes, but it goes enough. And that's really all we need. The chassis on these are very stiff, but the suspension is soft. And so with just usual steel wheels, soft springs, stiff chassis, yeah, quite an unusual but very nice, floaty but well handling ride. It's great. Brakes are very good, nice and firm, nice and well balanced. Back round the bend. Oh dear, I'm sorry, but your air freshener's just fallen off the dashboard. Give me more revs there. Nothing abusive, just up to 4,000 RPM. I need to confine the air freshener in a minute. Hope it's not broken. One very unusual feature in this car actually is the headlining. The headlining's not sagging. That's one of the Rover problems. They always seem to have these dreadfully saggy headlinings, and so this one's obviously been taken off and put back together at some point. Either that or it's spent a long time inside. The overall driving experience of this car is, you know, quite a happy one. It feels so kind of serene, really. It's very 90s feeling, and it's quite a happy car, but not happy in the same way that Maestro was, but happy in the same way that most R8s are, where they just feel really refined and really sort of rattle free. I mean, a 27-year-old car that doesn't rattle anywhere is quite impressive, let's be honest. I mean, it is very impressive for a car of this age, of this era, to have everything still screwed down properly and feel this nice. It doesn't feel like a new car, because new cars don't feel like this at all. They have a very different driving experience. The experience is mostly just numb. But for this car to be at this age and not have any rattles or squeaks anywhere, I think is very impressive. And it's not just this particular car, but these particular cars. They never seem to be rattling. They were just built properly in the first place. Modern cars are always just sort of clipped together, so they do feel quite nice and secure to start with, but once you start having to replace things and put things back on again, all of a sudden that build quality becomes rather shabby. Going up the hill before I finish. How about the turning circle? Look at that. Absolutely brilliant. I think it's fantastic how it can have such a nice tight turning circle, yet the steering still feels nice and responsive, and they are very responsive in these. Now, I'm used to manual gearboxes in R8s, and they're the only ones I've ever driven, and I've always thought that they're fantastic gearbox wise, but I've got to say I am impressed by the automatic gearbox as well. It's much smoother than I was expecting. Okay, I'm back at the yard, and my friend who owns this car is having a lovely little girly chat with my wife. Now, I've been doing lots of terrible car reviews, of course. Terrible as in it's a terrible car, not a terrible review. Although maybe that's a matter of opinion. And you can imagine a car of this age with a few faults would be in that category. But it really is not. This is a very nice car. And thanks for the beer. I really enjoyed driving this motor. The Rover R8 is a fantastic combination of rather old but still perfectly acceptably new.